So welcome, Kim Garland. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
And turn the light down a little bit. Okay. How's everyone today? Excited to be here?
I'm going to hope that my voice holds out. This fall allergy season has kicked in early for me this year, so I may be going back and forth from cough drops to coughing, but I hope y'all will just bear with me. As I say, I am with the Department of Children's Services. I am a regional investigations director with the Office of Child Safety. Basically what that means is I supervise all of Child Protective Services investigators in a 4-region area. So basically it's 24 counties. It's 24 most eastern counties. Northeast is where y'all are. That's an 8-county region. I also cover Knox, SOWK, which is down like around Sevierville, and then East Region, which is the other side of Knoxville. We recently had some changes in the way that we staff, and I'll explain that to y'all in a minute. Does anybody, what do you think of when you hear Department of Children's Services? You're not going to hurt my feelings. Okay. Child abuse. Anybody else? Nobody has something that pops in their head, negative or positive? Okay. So since I am over the investigation team, we do Child Protective Services. So what I'm going to do, this PowerPoint is the PowerPoint that I use when I talk to people about how to call in referrals and how we manage cases. As we're walking through that, we'll talk a little bit about the other sections of the department and how kids may touch, or how those other sections may touch on a child's life. If you have any questions, please stop me. No question is out of bounds. I may not know the answer, but I will try to find it for you or tell you where you can find it. The only thing that is out of bounds is I am not going to talk about anything case specific. So if your best friend's mom's aunt has a Child Protective Services case open, we're not going to talk about that today. But anything else about the department or how we do things, I'll be more than happy to discuss with y'all today. So we're going to talk a little bit about who's a mandated reporter, what information we gather when a report is made, and what professionals, generally who I give this PowerPoint presentation to is schools, medical communities, daycares, things like that. So they are what we call professional reporters. Does anybody know who is a mandated reporter in the state of Tennessee? Everyone. Everyone. We differ from a lot of other states in that area. A lot of other states, professional reporters, so teachers, doctors, coaches, people that come across kids in a professional setting are the only ones that are required to report. But in the state of Tennessee, if you are aware of child abuse, you are required by law to report it. Even if you see somebody beating their kid in the parking lot of the city. We'll talk a little bit about the screening decisions, how long we have to go out on cases, and then what happens after someone makes the call. So the Department of Children's Services Office of Child Safety houses the Child Abuse Hotline. The Child Abuse Hotline takes all reports of alleged child abuse and neglect. They run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long, all the time. There's always someone there to answer the call. If you have ever had to call the hotline for any reason, y'all are pretty young, so most of you are pretty young, you probably wouldn't have had this experience, but several years ago, it could take up to 20 minutes to get an operator on the phone to report child abuse or neglect, because we were still in the process of learning how to coordinate a call center and get it staffed appropriately and those kind of things. We are down now to less than 30 seconds. It takes less than 30 seconds to answer a call. And all of our hotline staff are trained. They're trained investigators, but they are also trained on how to work in a call center. Then they screen the reports to determine if the situation meets criteria for assignment as an investigation or an assessment. So in the state of Tennessee, we operate under what we call the MRS system, which is multiple response. The multiple response system for Child Protective Services is three-pronged. You have investigations, which are generally more criminal in nature. In an investigation, the alleged perpetrator is either classified as substantiated or unsubstantiated. The next prong we have is assessment. CPS assessors work cases that are more neglect-based in nature, chronic, things like environmental neglect, lack of supervision that's not considered severe. Like if there's a 2-year-old playing in the street on a busy road, they're probably going to call investigators for that. But if it's kind of a chronic lack of supervision, they might call assessment for that. The big difference between those two types of cases is investigations, we are required by state law to have cases closed within 60 days. We owe that to the families. We owe that to the people that are being alleged to have perpetrated a crime against a child to get that case worked quickly and have it settled. I mean, if you can imagine being accused of sexual abuse against a child, you would not want that dragging out for a year. That affects your whole life, especially if you didn't do it, right? So we are obligated to get those cases closed fairly quickly. Assessment can keep their cases open anywhere from 90 to 120 days. They have more time with families to put services in and really address those basic underlying parenting issues. The third prong of the MRS is called resource linkage. We don't actually open a case when it goes down the resource linkage track. That was kind of developed as a catch-all because there are families out there in need of services sometimes when they really haven't abused or neglected their children. So the example I use is a family's living in their car because their house burned down and they don't have any other resources. They're new to that area. Right now we have a great example. We have hurricane victims that are coming up this way. They may not know anyone up here. They just settled here and they don't know how to get in touch with resources and they need that. So if someone calls in a referral on a family like that, then we would open a resource linkage case, which is not a CPS case, and we would just hook them up with resources in their area to try to get them back on their feet. So that's the three prongs of CPS. Any questions? And I may jump out of sequence some on this. Conducting investigations or assessment, making decisions to keep children safe in the least restrictive setting. Least restrictive setting that's a big hot topic. Does anybody have any idea what that would mean? Y'all are going to be bored to tears if you're just going to listen to me talk for an hour. Okay. Think of a, shoot, I've lost the word. Anyway, you've got least restrictive on one side, most restrictive on the other side. And there's all these little steps in between, okay? So if we get called out on a case and we go in, we investigate, we determine that it was wholly unfounded, there wasn't any, the allegation was totally false, we're going to close our case, walk out the door, and leave that family alone. That is the least restrictive we can possibly be because we are getting out of that family's life. You go all the way over here to most restrictive, which is we have to remove a child from their parents' care, place them in stranger foster home in another county in the state, and take them away from everything they know. Okay, that's most restrictive. Can you imagine if I came in here today and said to you, you're not going home? Do you have dogs, cats? You're not going to see your dogs or cats today. You're not going back there. You have family, live with your family. You're not going to see your family today. We're going to take you and we're going to put you in a car with some strange people, and we're going to take you somewhere else. You're not going back to your school. You're not going to see your friends. You're not going to have contact with your church, your aunt that lives next door, and the puppy that you sleep with every night. None of that. You're not doing that anymore. And we're going to put you in a home with strangers who are probably very, very good, nice people. But you don't know them. And we're going to expect you to assimilate into their family life and do things the way they do things. And the way you did things before, that's not important. Can you imagine what that would be like? For a little kid especially, who's in a bad situation to start with. We try to never do that unless we absolutely have to. So all of those little steps in between, from least restrictive to most restrictive, we have to go through every single one. We have, if we can maintain the child safety in the home with services, then we put services in there. If we can maintain the child safely in the home with grandma moving in to help mom care for the child while she goes through drug treatment, we're going to move grandma in there if she'll agree to it. If we can maintain the child at grandma's house while mom gets her issue, I say mom just because, mom, dad, whoever, have their issues that they're dealing with, then we know the child is safe with a family member, with someone they know, with someone they love, and somebody they care about, right? If we can't do it with grandma, are there any other family members, friends, teachers, school coaches, church members, anybody? We turn over every rock in order to try to find a place for that kid to go where they know someone. If that's not possible, then we start looking at foster homes. We start where the child is. If we can maintain that child in a foster home in their county of residence, where they can go to their same school, interact with their same friends, go to their same after-school activities, go to their same church, we want to try to keep as many of those connections as we can. If that's not possible, we move the next step and we start looking for a foster home that's willing to transport. Can we find a foster home that's close enough that they'll drive them back to that school? We had a foster home, this has been several years ago when I was still in the field, but the foster home was driving the child back and forth to church every Sunday because they were very involved in their youth group at church. We've had foster homes that'll drive them back and forth from school, at least maybe even till the school year ends, and they have time over the summer to meet new people in their neighborhood, and they can then transition into another school. So every step along the way, we're looking. Where can we help this child be the most comfortable? Our absolute last resort, and the only time we do it is when safety is at the utmost, is stranger foster home and taking everything away from them. And even then, we work with them to try to maintain as much as we can with them. But that's least restrictive. And that's a big, if anybody ever is thinking about applying for a job at DCS and you walk into your interview and say you understand what least restrictive is, you've made leaps and bounds towards getting that job. We've covered that. Let me go ahead and go through this real quick. If you go to work for an agency or you already work for an agency, you are still the mandated reporter. The law used to read that a school or a doctor's office could have one person as the mandated reporter. So the teachers would go tell the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor would call in all the referrals. Or the doctor's office would go, the nurses would tell the social worker. The social worker would call in all the referrals. The principal sometimes will say, you're not allowed to call in referrals, they all have to go through me, the principal. That law changed, and schools can't, and doctor's offices can't require that anymore. The person who has the knowledge is the one that is the mandated reporter. They can ask you to track it, but they can't tell you you can't call it in, or they can't tell you just give the information to the social worker.
But can they lock require it to somebody else, so they don't have to say it, like to a teacher in the preschool, like you said, like you send it to that one person and then somebody else do it?
Nope.
They have the option, like you have to do it.
You have to do it. Why do you think that is?
You're the one that witnessed it.
You're the one that witnessed the information, but why couldn't you just tell somebody else?
It's hearsay.
Hearsay. Any other reason?
Privacy.
But everybody has to call in, anybody has to call in a referral, so it's not really private information at that point in time. Has anybody ever heard of the game telephone?
Oh, yes.
It's confused, it can be
It takes
changed.
just from one person to the next.
So I'm going to tell, what's your name again?
Just
Justin. I'm going to tell Justin something, and by the time he gets back over here to your professor, her version of the story is going to be about 100% different than where it started, right? We're sending investigators out into the field to investigate allegations on families. If we don't have good information to start with, we are either placing our investigators possibly in a dangerous situation, or we're accusing families of doing things that they may not have done, or we're missing something that did happen because we didn't have the appropriate information up front. So that's why they changed it, is to make sure we are getting the most accurate information that we can from the very beginning. And our hotline staff are trained to ask trigger questions to get information. And if you're not the one that has the information, the trigger questions don't do any good, because they can't help you remember anything, right? Because you didn't know what to start with. So we have 3 different ways that people can call in referrals. 2 different ways. We used to have a fax number on here, but we can do it online now. So our main toll-free number is 877-237-0004. Online referrals can be made at reportabuse.state.tn.us. And we now have the ability for people who call in referrals or do referrals online to track those referrals. So the hotline would ask if you wanted an email, a follow-up email to say whether or not the case was assigned. If you say yes, they will send you an email with your intake number. You can put your intake number into this website, and it'll pop up with either the case was screened out and why, or the case was assigned and here's the case manager information, if they have it yet. Like if sometimes if a call gets made on Friday night and it's not an emergency, it won't get assigned till Monday, so you won't know who the case manager or the investigator is until then. But that's fairly new, and people like it. It's pretty cool. So the hotline, that is kind of the door to get in with DCS. It's one of a few doors, but it's the biggest door. So they're going to take your information. You do have the right to call in a referral and remain anonymous. We don't like it when people do that because sometimes we have follow-up questions, or we can't find a family. Maybe somehow or another the address got entered wrong and we don't have anybody to follow up with. But you do not have to provide your information. Screens the information to determine if it meets criteria for assignment. The hotline staff know and understand not only DCS policy but law. We are governed by law on at what point we can knock on the door of someone's family and say, you've been accused of abusing your child. I mean, that's a big deal, and it's a big responsibility, and we want to make sure and not take it lightly. So there are laws that govern that. And the hotline knows all of that information, so they know up front if they need to screen it out because it doesn't meet law or criteria, or if they need to go ahead and turn it over to the county. All of our calls are recorded, and someone is always available. State law protects people who report abuse or neglect. No information, no identifying information can be released regarding a referent, with the exception, well, with 2 exceptions. One, if a case comes to the attention of court, we can release the information to a judge in chambers the judge is also bound by law and can't release that information to anyone else. If we have an allegation that someone is using our system to harass a family, we can press charges, and in that case, we are able to release that referent information. But that's a really big deal, and I've only known of that happening once in my 15 years with the department. We don't go after people for calling in referrals because we want people to call in referrals. We want to make sure that we're keeping kids safe. So, information gathered during the investigation is also confidential and protected by law. Let's see. We talked about that. If there is a case open and you are the referent, you will be contacted by the investigator or the assessment worker. And basically what they're going to say is, I'm Kim Garland. I've been assigned a case that you called in on Susie Q. I wanted to give you my contact information in case you have anything additional you'd like to report. Thank you. If you say, well, can you tell me what's going on? Can you tell me what's happened? Have you seen the kids yet? I'm going to say, I'm sorry, I'm not able to share that information with you. People get really aggravated with us when we tell the referrents that we can't share, especially if it's a family member, but we can't. We're bound by law. We cannot share information. So what we make decisions about is the child currently safe? One misconception about Child Protective Services. Well, let me ask you this. Who removes kids? The DCS worker? Anybody else? Who legally removes kids?
Judge.
The judge. DCS only has the right to remove a child from a parent's custody under very, very limited circumstances. So we have what's called an exigent removal. There was an appeal that came out of the Circuit 6 federal court a couple of years ago regarding the Fourth Amendment. And through the appeal, they're equating children to property. So DCS does not have the right to seize children under the Fourth Amendment unless we have something called an exigent circumstance. Basically, an exigent circumstance means that child is in physical danger now. The house is on fire, you walk in while they're perpetrating a sex act, or you view someone beating the heck out of their kid. It is very limited on how we can remove a child without a judge's permission. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It keeps us from making decisions about families that we shouldn't be making on the spur of the moment. All other removals have to be approved by a judge prior to the removal. So there's two ways that we do that. Well, yeah, two ways that we do that. We have what's called an ex parte petition for removal and order, and that means we can go to the judge's office, we get sworn in, the judge asks us to tell them the circumstances, we report to the judge. That's called ex parte communication when you're talking to a judge outside of a courtroom, being sworn in and all that, with the other party there to defend themselves. But in cases of child safety, we are allowed to do that in certain circumstances. So we tell the judge the situation. If the judge agrees these kids are in danger, we need to go ahead and remove. He signs the order. Then we have the judge's permission to go get those kids. We have to provide the family a hearing within 3 business days. Yes.
What was that called again?
Ex parte. E-X-P-A-R-T-E. The other way that we remove kids is if it's not something we need to do immediately, it's more of a chronic issue. What we will do is file a petition with the court and set a date. We present the evidence to the judge in court, the family's there with an attorney to defend themselves, and then the judge makes a final decision on whether or not we have enough to remove. After we have the 72-hour hearing, That's what's called a preliminary hearing. The preliminary hearing just means we have to show enough evidence to say we believed at the time the child was in danger. So one of our judges explains it like this. So you've got the scales of justice, right? Ex parte just means it has to tilt a little bit on the side of child safety, and we have the right to remove. In 30 days, we have to go back to court with the family, and we have to prove our case. So where prelims here, it's not clear, and it's not beyond a shadow of reasonable doubt. It's not as much as that, but it's just a little bit above of clear and convincing. We have to provide the court clear and convincing evidence, not hearsay, not what we thought, not our opinion, clear and convincing evidence of why that child should have been removed. And if we can't do it, the judge will send the kid home at 30 days. And even after the child is in foster care, they have regular reviews. The judge is making sure that DCS is doing what we need to do through the foster care system to get the parents the help that they need and get the kids home if reunification is the goal, or to move towards permanency through adoption if it's something that the parents are just not going to be able to get back on their feet. Any questions about the court process while I'm here? Okay, so we also talk about risk factors. We do a lot of assessments. We do formal assessments and informal assessments. Our formal assessments, we have what's called a safety assessment that we do first time we go out to meet with the family. We are doing that safety assessment before we leave the home, because once we walk out the door and leave the child in the home, we have decided that the child is safe enough to stay there. So we have that safety assessment done. For risk and ongoing services, we do what's called a FAST. And I don't remember what that stands for. We at DCS love our acronyms. It's basically, though, an assessment for ongoing risk factors. It asks a lot of questions about the family, the parent's history. You know, did they have an abusive childhood? It talks about A&D issues. It goes into more depth about behavioral problems that the child might have, because that tool helps us determine whether or not we have a need for services. And then we move forward with services if we have to. Why do you think we would talk about strengths when we're investigating abuse or neglect? Why would we ask about strengths?
Personal strengths or what?
Personal strengths of the family, personal strengths of the parents, strengths of the child. Why would we be looking at identifying strengths when we're not just risk, but strengths?
Because it's like that it's not just risk, it's usually some good in there, but there is some bad, but there is a little bit of good.
You would hope. You would hope.
Yeah.
What would we use that for?
It's a positive kind of like reinforcement where you let the child feel safe, and you would try to strengthen that as you go into the case.
Okay, that's, yeah, we would use it for the child's benefit. Anybody else? Yes.
I think you would use that to develop a treatment plan to see where their strengths are, so you could find like a path that fits the family.
Absolutely. We can identify all the risk factors in the world for a family, but if we can't identify strengths to build on, to help encourage the child and the family to do better, to help the family to see that, yes, see, you do have some good things going on here, and then to use that in our treatment planning, then we're not going to get anywhere with that family. We have to be able to find those strengths to build on. The hotline also makes a decision on how fast CPS should respond. The hotline wants to know demographic information. I will tell you, we have found kids before with nothing more than a license plate number. So whatever information people have that's identifying, we still ask them to call it in, because we will do our best to find them. If we know kids' parents' names, siblings' names, that just makes life easier. They do ask for details of the abuse or neglect, physical evidence that the person who's calling in the referral may know about, injuries, behaviors, environmental. That's back again to why the one that knows it calls it in. Because if you've told somebody else this, they may not know all of this information. That's one of those trigger questions, right? So if there's a teacher who calls in a referral and the teacher talked to little Susie's best friend, Jenny, who says, Susie told her this happened, and Jenny's telling you, then we need to know Jenny's information because we're going to contact her parents and ask if we can talk to her as a witness. Because we need to find out where exactly the information came from so we can get to the bottom of the story.
Can they come in and talk to a child without asking the parents? Like if somebody calls it in, can they go the next day and talk to the child at school or
Yes.
without the parents' permission?
Yes. In certain circumstances. Everything is certain circumstances, right? Okay, so the law gives us the right and the ability to talk to a child victim. We cannot talk to a witness or an alleged child perpetrator without a parent's permission. But we can talk to a child victim without a parent's permission. In investigations, we do that a lot because since our cases are often more criminal in nature, we work them with law enforcement. I'll talk to you a little bit about that here in a minute. But we don't want the parents to get to the kids first to coach them or say, if you tell, I'm going to beat you when you get home. So we want to make that kind of surprise visit to where we can get the kid at their most honest. Assessments are a little bit different. Because you're assessing needs of the whole family, not really just one incident that might be a crime against a child, they usually call the family first and go out and make contact with the family as a whole. Now, they still have to talk to the children privately, but we try to involve the family more from the very beginning in assessment cases. Because we're not so much investigating a crime. We're trying to help stabilize a family. Just start here, then there.
Can cases transition from like investigation to assessment?
No, but they can go the other way. Once it comes in an investigation, it's always an investigation. Now, that doesn't mean we don't put services in. Investigators assess for the same type of safety, risk, and strengths that assessors do. And we also put in services with families a lot. But what brings us to the family's door is a crime. What brings assessment to the door is more of a need for the family. So we can flip them that way, but you can't flip them the other way.
Okay, so I'm from Mississippi, and I know someone that has been walking and custody battles right now with his wife, Brad's wife, and she is dating a drug dealer, and the kids have complaints in them, and he has called Child Protective Services, they have done a house visit, but they won't do anything because the time that they went in for like 30 seconds, for a short period of time, they didn't find any drugs or paraphernalia, so they can't do anything. Like, what about like drug testing and random drug testing in parents? Like, why won't they do that?
I can't speak for Mississippi. If you all don't know, then you've been living under a rock. We have a huge opioid crisis in this area. East Tennessee is probably the worst in the nation when it comes to opioid and drug crisis. Like, we've even got Nashville. Our senior leadership in Nashville was always like, why are y'all removing so many kids over there? What is going on in East Tennessee? And we kept telling them, it's drugs. We're telling you, it's drugs, it's drugs, it's drugs. And finally, people started paying attention. And now we are recognized, and they're doing all kind of pilot programs and stuff over here now trying to help with the drug treatment of families and how to deal with kids. And we get a lot of babies born drug exposed. It's bad. It's bad. We do, in Tennessee, we do random drug screens. We can do that legally. Parents can refuse, but we can always take them to court and have them complete why, if we need to. We don't want to start there because that tends to put a little bit of a crimp in the relationship with the family once you take them to court. But we do random drug screens. Drugs are hard because they're so hard to prove. Because even if a person tests positive, we have to prove that it's affecting their ability to parent. We can't just assume that we know if you're using drugs it affects your ability to parent. No. We have to prove how does it affect your ability to parent, right? So we have to, we're not law enforcement and we're not the moral police. We cannot tell people how to live their lives unless it somehow impacts their ability to parent their children. I don't mean to sound harsh when I say this, but effectively for DCS, if the parents are using drugs on the weekend when the kids are at grandma's house, that is not my problem. That is a law enforcement issue. That may be somebody else's problem. It's not my problem because I have to prove that it's affecting their ability to parent.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
You know, you just said that his kids complain about the boyfriend,
Mm-hmm.
He's just really fed up because nothing is happening and he can't do anything. And, his kids are coming in directly telling him these stories.
So again, I can't speak for Mississippi.
Yeah.
It is not illegal in the state of Tennessee to spank your children. So
Even if it's not your own child.
even if it's not your own child, if you have permission from the parent to do it,
But what if he doesn't have permission?
well, then we would have to prove that. And the mom, who's the girlfriend to him, would have to say, no, I didn't give him permission to spank my kids. Then he's going to get arrested, so she's probably not going to say that. Because then that's assault, right? So, because we don't investigate assault by a stranger. That's criminal. That's a law enforcement issue. We investigate caregivers. So him being in the home, though, puts him in the role of a caregiver. So we could probably still pursue that. But it's hard. Divorce, we get a lot of divorcing parents and pissed off grandparents. So, okay, you, then you, yes.
Well, it's okay, so say they call and say that they're doing drugs, and y'all randomly show up and do it, or y'all have to have actual evidence of the person?
Well, we have to have a referral.
Oh, okay.
So the referral has to have enough information in it that the hotline can say, yes, the law gives us a right to go talk to these parents. Then we're probably not going to show up at their door with a cup and say pee. We're going to engage the family first, right? So, but law does give us the right to ask them. We can't force anybody to do anything at the end of the day. Yes. You, sorry.
So we'll say like you're out of school and you're working there, and like a parent spanks their kid in the bathroom. Like, if they leave a mark, is that?
The law is very specific on what the mark has to look like. Okay, so marks on a child 6 or under is considered abusive. If it goes beyond redness, okay, but bruising on a kid over the age of 6 in the general butt area, even lower thighs, is not considered to be abusive. And we struggle with that because we've gotten some pretty ugly butt pictures. And the DA won't prosecute, and we have a real hard time substantiating because they'll appeal it and cite that law. So it has to be pretty severe if they're over 6, unless it's outside the butt or other thighs. Okay, so you're next.
Can you be a foster parent and work for ETS?
You can. There are restrictions around it because we can't give the impression that we're removing kids to place with our people, right? So if you're a foster parent in Northeast region, you would only be able to foster kids out of another region. But yes, you can do it. And if it's your own family, because remember before I said that we try to place with family? So there's 2 ways we can do that. We can either do it through the foster care route where those kinship, we call them kinship, where that kinship placement becomes a foster parent and they go through the process. We do an initial, what we call an expedited home study, And that gives us the ability to say their home is safe enough. We can put that kid there while they go through the process of becoming, they have to take these, they're called PATH classes. That one I know. Parents as tender healers is what foster parents take. And so it gives them time to complete that. So it's your own family, it's a little bit different. They can stretch those rules a little bit.
In the case, you have an open drug case with a child, family calls and says, she passed out on the couch with a needle in her arm, baby's in the crib.
That's what we call a P1, and we're gonna go out there right now. And we're gonna take law enforcement.
At 2 o'clock in the morning,
Yep.
at any time they call in, I mean, if they call you directly as their caseworker,
Well,
what's going on?
they're probably not gonna get their caseworker at 2 o'clock in the morning unless their caseworker happens to be the one on call. They're gonna call the hotline. So, and we're gonna go out there. Okay, back here and then here.
Okay. You said that if they're over 6 and they have like bruises, okay, so how do you prove that the parents don't know how to get away with, like,
We can.
okay, so the parents could just use that area?
Yep.
And get away with it?
Now, if we see it chronic, if we just keep getting referrals and keep getting referrals, well, time out, let me back up.
Okay.
Remember, just because we can't substantiate and just because they won't charge, doesn't mean we don't have options. I mean, we're still gonna look at some parenting for that set of parents, right, or for that dad or whatever. Because we want to help him understand or her understand appropriate discipline and appropriate parenting. So we're gonna make an effort to engage them in services regardless, okay? But if we continue to get chronic reports, we're probably gonna take something like that before the judge on a non-emergency petition and let him review the facts, him or her, review the facts and make a decision.
So him or her could take it further and use that as evidence?
Yes.
If it gets that far?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So if there's a little boy who broke his leg and he went to the hospital, of course, and ETSU came and investigated that home, under what circumstances did they possibly do that? I haven't, like my cousin, whenever he was little, this is several years ago, fell and broke his leg, and his mother was, her home was investigated.
Mhm.
So like, under what reasons could she, why would she have been investigated? Does that make sense?
Yes. Depends on the age of the child and the circumstances surrounding the referral, right? So if the hospital calls it in and says, we have this child here, he's 2 years old, he has a broken femur, which is kind of uncommon, it's kind of hard to break that bone, and the explanation that the parent is giving just really isn't matching up with the injury that we see, then we're going to investigate that because the medical is saying, something's not right here. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to substantiate. It doesn't mean that at the end, once the x-rays come back or testing or whatever, that there wasn't a perfectly logical explanation for it. Generally, there's got to be some sort of allegation that it happened on purpose and was caused by a carriage. It could depend on the age.
He was small. But
Yeah.
He was, I mean, they pulled him away.
Yeah, littler kids. I mean, opposite self-disclosure, my 3-year-old fell off a bunk bed and broke his femur. And it didn't really bruise immediately. And they had to put he was in the cast came up to here, went all the way down one leg and halfway down the other leg because he was in traction for 3 weeks in the bed at the hospital. So they didn't call in a referral, but what we said made sense with what the injury was, plus the doctor talked to my son, and my son was verbal enough to be able to tell him what had happened. And so they had enough information there that the hospital didn't feel the need to call it in. If they had, it wouldn't have been difficult for CPS to talk to my son, to go to the home, to see his bunk bed that at the minute it happened, my husband, it was one of those old wooden bunk beds, and my husband cut it apart and put it on the ground, two different beds. So it wouldn't have been hard to see what had happened there. We don't, the majority of the cases that we get, we don't substantiate. because, you know, stuff happens to kids. It's a horrible thing to say, but kids die. And we can't always prevent that. There was a little kid it was in the paper. I don't have a referral on this, so I'm not disclosing anything, but there was a newspaper article, some kid in Sevierville ran out the front door of the store that some family member owns right into the street, and somebody hit him and the kid died. It's a terrible thing, but it's not always abusive or neglectful.
Well, just what you were saying, what happened with your kid when I was younger, I fell off my bunk bed and I hit my head on the window seal.
They're just bad, aren't they? Bunk beds are bad.
Yeah, well, my brother were being stupid, but like,
No.
I was out of it, but my mom told me later that like, yeah, she was asked what happened.
Uh-huh.
And because our window seal was like, not jagged, but it was like creased like that, she said, yeah, they told her that, yeah, her story made sense.
Yes.
That's how the injury looks.
Yeah.
Because
You could see the crease in your head.
no, but you see, it makes sense with the injury that I had, so just if you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for evidence. We don't want to substantiate somebody for something that they didn't do, you know? It's a big deal. And while most people don't have access to the child abuse registry, if that parent ever decides to get a job in a school system or in the cafeteria working around kids or a daycare, they can't. They're substantiated. So we don't want to do that to them.
How often do you work with the law enforcement? How often do you have parents that are willing to let you have your child? I mean, do you always bring the police with you? Do you ever take a child home?
No, it really doesn't happen that often. Most of the time, by the time we get to removal, parents know what's going on. Unless it's one of those 2 o'clock in the morning situations and mom's passed out on the couch, then we have to take the kid into custody because we don't have any other choices. Can't leave the kid in the crib overnight, you know, by him or herself. We do work with law enforcement. We are part of what's called a CPIT team, Child Protective Investigative Team. So Tennessee Code Annotated requires each county to have its own Child Protective Investigative Team. And that's made up of CPS investigators, law enforcement, DA's office, the Children's Advocacy Center, a medical professional that specializes in child abuse, and a mental health professional. And so we all meet, depending on where, we meet monthly. And we talk about our cases, but we work the severe abuse cases, sex abuse, severe physical abuse, death. We work all of those cases with law enforcement. But as far as just taking them out to families' homes, not unless we have to.
And social workers, she gets calls all the time asking if she can take those.
Oh, is she a foster parent? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're on call 24 hours. We're on call overnight. So if the hotline calls us about something overnight, are we done? Is that clock right? Okay. So if the hospital calls us overnight, then we have to go. I'm the hospital. If the hotline calls us overnight and it's an emergency, then we get up and go. We always have somebody on call.